Welcome to Ring of Fire. I'm Mike Papantonio. Coming up on today's show, we'll tell you how the banking industry has become about as trustworthy as the Mafia, except the bankers, well, they never go to jail. We'll also tell you about the massive amounts of fraud being peddled by the dietary supplement industry, and we'll explain how an oil industry judge got her hands on and dismissed the largest environmental lawsuit in history against the very people that that judge used to represent. We have all that and more coming up, but right now, remember, you just stepped into the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
That has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
Today, the only difference between the Mafia and the banking industry is that members of the Mafia have to actually be sentenced to jail for their crimes. Bankers don't. Even with evidence of banks helping to illegally launder money or buying drug smuggling planes, our Justice Department has refused to take action. Joining me now to talk about this is Peter Mougey. Peter, what's interesting about the HSBC story is that it has the Loretta Lynch connection. That's the woman who Obama nominated for the AG, and she was hugely involved in the HSBC story. As a matter of fact, she was part of the reason they got a free pass for laundering money to drug cartels and engineering treason with Iran and North Korea by allowing the banks to do business with those folks. And you know, so to me, this is a very timely, important story right now if we're going to change the way we do business in the United States where it comes to banking, which we don't seem willing to do. What's your take on it?
I'll tell you what, Pap, I mean, I feel, it's like that whack-a-mole game. I mean, where they just keep popping up, different problems, different banks, but there is a reoccurring theme time after time after time. And that's this, Pap. It's that revolving door you and I have talked about before. These bankers go from banking jobs to regulators, back to Wall Street to regulators, and they won't smack the hands of the people. They won't do anything to put these people in jail. They won't do anything to hold them accountable.
Tell us the HSBC story. How bad is it?
It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. One of the largest banks in the world is laundering, hiding money from drug cartels, tax avoiders, fat cats, you name it, Pap. They're hiding the money. They're laundering the money for these people. They're not paying taxes. They're allowing them to operate, and they keep it all secret, Pap. And at the end of the day, it's the rich get richer, whether they're legal rich or illegal rich. They've hidden it. They've avoided it, and it's all through the secrecy laws of the Swiss banks that were supposed to have been opened up in 2014, but we're now finding that this is an oops, I missed it.
Okay, take us back to 2014 when they made all these when these Swiss banks, and by the way, these are not just Swiss banks. These have huge connections to the United States.
Absolutely.
We could close these banks down right here in the United States if the Department of Justice had any courage at all. They could shut them down and say, no, you know what, you're getting the death penalty for being a repeat criminal. But take us back to 2014 and tell us what happened there and how it ties into what's going on today. 2014,
it's actually just the same whack-a-mole. It's the same problem. These guys have all popped back up again. It's the same theme of hiding money in the Swiss banks in 2014 promised, along with all the rest of the banks.
Well, Peter, isn't it worse than that? Didn't they sought out, in the United States, we had told the Swiss bank, we had told all the international banks that to do these things, to hide money, to have bearer bonds, that all these things are illegal. And as a matter of fact, HSB had already been fined almost $2 billion for exactly what they were doing, and we gave them a pass on prosecution way back then, didn't we?
Absolutely. So the free pass with the prosecutions from the same bankers that were on the other side of the table. So the regulators were previously bankers from Wall Street, previously lawyers from Wall Street that represented lawyer firms. Now they're regulator side. So they leave Wall Street with these fat cat packages, these $100 million packages. They go to the regulator side, and essentially they're overseeing or regulating their old friends and partners. And they know to go back to make big money again, They cannot issue death penalties. They cannot push people in jail because they're never going to be invited back to the other side of the table if they're too mean and nasty and start really prosecuting these cases, which is why, although we can tell them till we're blue in the face this is illegal, it's that revolving door from one side of the table to the other. That's the problem.
It's like a repeat child molester that we won't put in prison. The child molester here in the United States, of course, is the bank that's taking mom and pop money. They're cheating the government out of taxes. They are criminal. It is a criminal enterprise. HSB is a criminal enterprise.
They're co-conspirators. They're co-conspirators in the laundry. I mean, it's ridiculous.
No question about it. They were actually buying airplanes that they knew was being used for drug cartel business. They were buying boats that they knew were being used for drug cartel business. Look, here's the real problem. Lanny Brewer, who was a lawyer with Covington Burling in Washington, D.C., the same law firm that Eric Holder came from, he gave bankers a total pass for everything. I mean, let me go down the list. Let me just see. Money laundering, fraud, treason, inside trading, price fixing, antitrust, theft, more RICO than we could possibly even count here. But Lanny Brewer, after he left that position with the Department of Justice in charge of making sure banks do what they're supposed to, he went back to his law firm at Covington Burling, who specializes in representing these Wall Street white-collar criminals.
Just like Attorney General Holder is just about ready to do now. And they know if they crack down on the banking side, they will never be welcome back to Wall Street or the law firms that help them avoid these schemes if they crack down. I'm telling you, Pap, the problem is you got to shut down this revolving door. No one's going to be held accountable. It's too cozy. It's too incestuous, and the word co-conspirator fits all too cleanly, Pap. This is a co-conspiracy.
Peter, the President of the United States, Obama, again, is getting ready to appoint Loretta Lynch. He knows who Loretta Lynch is. He knows, if he can pick up a book and read, he knows that Loretta Lynch is the one who initiated the case against HSBC to begin with, because the Department of Justice says you can't do these things. But then she's also the person that let them get a slap on the wrist, fined them, withheld adjudication on criminal conduct, gave them a free pass, right along with Eric Holder, right along with Obama. Obama knew exactly what was going on. And from top to bottom, there's no way to fix this problem, is there? I mean, how do you fix it when you have the President of the United States participating?
Well, you have by this revolving door, but one way to fix it is this. The amount of money made on financial engineering on the positive side, at best, at worst, conspiracies to launder money, all of it at the end of the day is the bottom line. If we change the compensation structure for these people coming off of Wall Street, the more risk they take, the more crazy bets they make, the more illegal things, the more money laundering they do, the more money they put in their pocket. The bonuses and compensation systems, the $100 million. I mean, you're talking about, you remember coming out of the 2008 crisis that the banks were getting bailed out, and we were giving bonuses of $150 million to Wall Street fat cats. If you change the
wait, the same
structure.
ones who were so damn incompetent, so greedy, so criminal that they stole $13 trillion from the American economy.
I mean,
and then we bonus them $100 million, and Obama participates in that.
There were reports. I mean, Pap, I've reviewed several million documents, analysis from all the big banks over the course of time from that 2008 crash, and I'll tell you one thing. They knew what was going on. It was a calculated decision in the 2008 crash, and the reason why is because they knew they could take the short-term profits, put them in their pockets, run to the other side of the table, and which they're doing now as regulators, as Federal Reserve, you name it. On the other side of the table, they put their money in their pocket, they're on the other side, and they'll come back. If, in fact, we compensated Wall Street based on long-term or risk-adjusted returns or long-term returns over their tenure, rather than I made a killing this year, the firm made a killing this year, I'm taking a $100 million bonus.
Illegally, we made a killing.
Absolutely. But they know they're gone after that.
Yeah, we made a killing by stealing mom and pop's money from pensions. We made a killing through tax evasion. We made a killing by doing HSB business with criminals. We made a killing by breaking all of America's tax laws and putting money offshore to protect ourselves. We made a killing. Look, Peter, part of this begins all the way back to the Clinton years. If you think about it,
absolutely.
Clinton was the guy that opened the Wall Street relationship with white-collar banking gangsters. And he's the one that started giving them a free pass because they were giving so much money to the to the Democrats. They had been giving money up to that point to Republicans. And so Clinton said, we want part of that money too, so we're going to pack the SEC and the Justice Department with industry hacks, get out of jail free passes. We're going to create banking mobsters. Nobody's going to go to jail. And you know what? Even when a guy like you, Peter, tries to take him to civil court, we're going to make it so difficult for you to recover mom and pop's pension money that nobody even tries. This is an ugly story. Unfortunately, it's not going to get any better. If Hillary Clinton runs and wins, it's just a continuation of this story. If the Republicans win the White House, it's a continuation of the story. Obama doesn't seem intent on doing anything to solve it. Peter Mougey, this is agonizing to even have to talk about this story again.
Over and over again.
Thank you for joining me, okay?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
The supplement industry operates with virtually no oversight and no regulations from the federal government. Because of this, they can make claims about miracle cures that go unchecked, and the consumer continues to fall for those claims, unfortunately. But journalists have caught on to this scam, and I have Howard Nations with me now to tell us what's happening. Howard, thank goodness for the AG up in New York, Snyderman. I mean, he's been active against Wall Street. He's been active now. Finally, he's taken action on supplement scams that are going on all over the country. What's your take on what's happening up there?
Well, you're right. Kudos to Eric Snyderman, because last week he told 4 major retailers, Walmart, GNC, Walgreens, and Target, to pull these failed tested products from their shelves. New York did an investigation, and the DNA testing of those products showed that St. John's wort contained no St. John's wort. Ginkgo biloba, none. Echinacea, none. What they found instead was that they had cheap fillers that were not on the label. They were using rice, mustard, wheat, and radish. Now think about that. If you have gluten allergy, for example, and you think you're taking St. John's wort, and in fact you're taking wheat, this is dangerous. Now Walmart pulled them from their shelves, but typical of Walmart, they continue selling these same products online even though they know it's fraudulent. The New York test showed that 21% of the products tested, only 21%, contained the DNA of what was on the label. That's amazing.
Okay, so somebody, for example, that might be taking St. John's wort, for example, because they're fighting depression, they're taking it, they're believing that it's something that is curing their depression, or people take that, as you know, for also for immunity boosts. They're antiviral. So they think they're taking it during the cold season because it's going to make things better, but it's just powder. It's a lie. It's completely made up junk. And Walmart knows it. They clearly know it now, but they're continuing to sell it. Is that right? That's
right. And it's even worse because it contained wheat, which of course could be very dangerous to people with a gluten allergy. So there are real dangers involved in this.
Well, okay, so what is the next step? What happens if you have the New York AG that is saying you can't do these things and they're doing them anyway? It's not just Walmart, it's all the big box stores that are participating in this, whether it's selling ginseng, St. John's wort, ginkgo biloba, you name it. You go to the store, you think that an individual believes that they're buying the real thing. The industry knows it's not the real thing, but there's no regulation here, is there? Didn't Orrin Hatch get involved in making sure that there were no regulations of this industry?
Orrin Hatch made very sure. Back in 1994, Orrin Hatch was approached by this industry, which was very small at the time, much smaller industry, to see to it that they were unregulated. So he got legislation passed in the Senate at the time, which so you do not have FDA control over these dietary supplements. And as a result, Orrin Hatch has been protecting them now for 20 years. And he's on the Friends and Family plan. He got his son in as the chief lobbyist for the industry, and he tied it back into his to his own state. The state of Utah has $1 out of every $4 in this industry, which is billions of dollars. $1 out of every $4 in this industry goes through Orrin Hatch's state of Utah, despite all the warnings, despite all the things that are clearly wrong with this. That's what's happening with it.
Well, I mean, the real shame is we know that some of this really can do people some good, but it has to be the real thing. If somebody says, "Well, we're selling you St. John's wort," for example, if it has to be the real thing, maybe it's going to do them some good. I mean, that's kind of the problem here. But when you don't know and there's no FDA overlooking any of this, is anything being offered by the Democrats or to say we need to do something to monitor this?
Well, Dick Durbin has proposed a bill, and he's joined by our new senator from Connecticut, Blumenthal, and they have offered a new bill that is for the regulation of the industry by the FDA. And they've also called for a national investigation of the industry by the FDA. Durbin says it's unconscionable for these retailers to be deliberately misleading consumers.
Has anybody called Orrin Hatch out and said, "Look, we know you're doing this because you're putting money in your family's pocket, your son's pocket. You're pushing this non-regulation because you're trying to help your immediate family. You're trying to help your friends." How does Orrin Hatch respond to that? I mean, it's so obvious that this is exactly why he's doing all this.
Yeah, and he doesn't deny it. He says, "Well, I do exactly what they want me to do because they don't ask me to do anything that's wrong." That's his attitude about it. Yeah, it's okay. So what he's ignoring is this. This is not just a matter of fraud. There are real dangers involved here. Harvard studied this from 2004 to 2012. There were 237 Class 1 recalls of dietary supplements. Now, Class 1 means that there's a reasonable probability that the use or exposure will cause either serious adverse health consequences or death. And the dietary supplements of vitamins, minerals, botanicals, and herbal remedies were responsible for more than half of these recalls. So it's a very dangerous business.
Isn't part of the problem here also the media? Matter of fact, this story really originated in Canada, where you had the Canadian media start taking a real serious look at it, and it was Canada that identified these very serious problems. They were telling, they were in the media about it. The U.S. media ignored it for about 8 months. As usual, but Snyderman got the information directly from Canada, not from the United States. We did nothing to even investigate what was going on in these retail stores with these supplements.
Right. Canada said that Americans are spending $5 billion a year on herbal. They look particularly at the herbal supplements, for which they're getting nothing. They were fraudulent. They described them as fraudulent and said the stupid Americans are spending $5 billion a year on them.
Canadians got it right, didn't they, Howard?
Well, it's the American desire for the quick fix.
Yeah.
Weight loss without a diet or exercise, instant energy and greater health in a capsule, long life in a supplement, and intelligence in a pill. But your first clue is if you're trying to get intelligence in a pill, that ship's already sailed for you. Sorry.
Howard Nations, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure, Mike.
There are very few industries in this country that have as much power over our government as the oil industry. It's not just politicians. Oil companies have been actively buying off judges for decades, putting them in office with big money. And the problem is that the people that they put in those judgeships come right from industry. Joining me now to talk about this problem is Farron Cousins, the executive editor of the Trial Lawyer magazine. Farron, I think this is a huge story. You had an Obama-appointed federal judge that gave the oil industry this huge pass by dismissing a $50 billion lawsuit around Louisiana where land loss from industry conduct, from the oil industry conduct, is so bad that Louisiana is losing a football field worth of land in wetlands every hour. And so, then we find out that this judge, this Obama-appointed judge, worked directly for the industry for decades before she became a judge. Didn't recuse herself, didn't remove herself from the case, just made the case go away. What's your take on this story?
They never recuse themselves. I mean, we've seen this time and time again. The Supreme Court, they don't even recuse themselves when they've gone out and, had dinner with some of the people. But this particular judge in Louisiana is especially disgusting. One, because it is an Obama appointee, unanimously approved by the U.S. Senate. No objection from Republicans, no objections from Democrats. She gets on as a U.S. District Judge. And this lawsuit that she has dismissed was, the New York Times declared it the most ambitious environmental lawsuit in the history of the United States, which it really was. What they were doing is they were suing this Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authority. East is the group that was filing the suit. They were going after 97 different fossil fuel companies for, as you pointed out, essentially destroying the coastline of Louisiana. And
first of all, it's wetlands, isn't it, Farron?
Right.
I mean, the wetlands is the only thing that keeps New Orleans from disappearing when you have hurricanes. I mean, they already have a huge flood problem, and the very land that's protecting these inland cities is the wetlands. But didn't the industry come out and say, I mean, the oil industry admitted that they've already destroyed about 40% of the wetlands, that their conduct destroyed 40% of the wetlands. Isn't that an admission by the industry already?
You would think so. I mean, in all of the reports, because this flood protection agency had been tasked with coming up with a mitigation plan, essentially. For many years since Katrina, they have been working on ways to figure out how to protect these wetlands so that we don't end up with another Katrina-sized flood of the city of New Orleans or any other city in Louisiana. And so while they're doing this, they find out the oil industry is responsible. State Department says maybe as much as 60%, but the energy industry says, you know what, we'll concede we are definitely responsible for about 40% of it. And the State Department says, well, maybe more, but 40%, that's a pretty good admission of guilt. I mean, that's as if a defendant walks into a courtroom and he says, yeah, I did murder this guy. And then this judge, Nanette Brown, is basically saying, yeah, you murdered him, but I'm still going to throw out the case. I mean, that is the type of admission of guilt almost that we're dealing with in this case. The industry said, yes, we did what we are being accused of doing. We did it, we know it, we admit it. And the judge still said, but I'm going to dismiss this lawsuit.
Give us a little more background on the judge. This story's almost, I mean, people are going to hear this and say, surely a federal judge. Look, Farron, remember in the BP case, you had federal judge after federal judge remove themselves from the case because they either had worked for the industry or had ownership in the industry in some way, form, or fashion. But they were decent enough to say, no, we're not going to get involved. It's not fair.
But you know what? Let me point out why they did that. And I'm not blowing smoke to you, but it's because you were getting on TV every night with Ed Schultz, and you told those stories.
Well, you
were the one going out there telling those stories, and nobody else was covering that fact until you and Ed forced that issue, and you made it an issue. You made the public talk about it. You made the media talk about it. And that's the problem, is that, we don't have enough of that anymore.
This happened under the radar, didn't it? Farron? Tell us how. First of all, the judge her roots are clearly not that she just worked for a law firm that handled environmental disasters on behalf of the oil industry. She actually did it herself, didn't she?
She did, starting in about the 80s, all through until she was appointed by Obama as U.S. District Judge. She bounced around to about 4 different law firms over that 20-year span, with a brief span as assistant with Mayor Landrieu down in Louisiana. But in every single one of those law firms, she worked on the defense side as an environmental litigation specialist. You can check the websites of every one of these 4 law firms, and each of them sits there boasting about the fact that they know how to go into court, sit next to the oil industry, which she did, and defend some of the most egregious conduct you could imagine, including this admission of guilt that we have about 40% of the wetlands being
Farron,
gone.
how did it get to her? How did the case get to her to begin with? And then I guess the second point is why wasn't she decent enough to say, no, I can't do this objectively? How did it get to her to begin with?
Well, that's another dirty part of the story that nobody's talking about, is the fact that this case originally was going to go to state court, where it should have gone. This is a Louisiana issue with Louisiana companies and Louisiana Flood Protection Agency. But when the oil industry found out about it, they said, you know what? We're going to do what we call forum shopping. We're going to find a judge that's friendly to us and move the case into that jurisdiction, and we know exactly what will happen. And that's what they did. Nanette Brown did not stumble upon this case. She didn't walk into her chamber one day and they said, oh, by the way, you're going to have this case. No, she knew that they were shopping around. They specifically picked her, so they moved it from state to federal court, and that's how it ended up in her hands.
Well,
and
I got to tell you, she would have had to reach out for it herself to make it really happen, and obviously she did.
Right.
But what's so disturbing about this, aside from the judge part of the story, is that Obama, this is a pattern. This is a pattern of Obama's pick of these kinds of judges. I think what it is, it's almost he's so disconnected. This is a guy who, he was a professor of law, but he never practiced law. He doesn't understand even how the system works, I wonder sometimes.
See, that is a great point about Obama's personality in general. He was a professor. He taught. He wasn't in there in a courtroom, and he didn't have to stand up, take a side, and make a stand. And that's the difference.
Yeah,
he
and
never had to fight for what he believed in or fight for the little guy.
So in other words, this Nanette Brown might have been good on social issues. She may have been good on things like same-sex marriage or whatever the social issue of the day may have been, but nobody took the time to find out what is her real corporate connection. And with this Democratic and Republican Congress, they probably would have been thrilled to know that she was so joined at the hip with corporate America. That's another part of the story, though, isn't it?
It is. They absolutely, both Democrats and Republicans, love Nanette Brown because really there's no other industry that wields the kind of influence, the power of the purse as the dirty energy industry. They have bought every politician in the state of Louisiana. They give fairly evenly. Used to be mostly Republicans. It's evening out a little bit now, but they're giving to Democrats and Republicans, just hedging their bets. Whoever wins, they win.
Yeah, it's happening in Florida, too. That's why we're probably going to see drilling offshore before we know it.
Well, let me point out something. The entire dirty energy industry, they could have avoided this lawsuit altogether. A couple years ago, before the suit was even being brought, when this flood authority that we talked about earlier was drafting their plan for mitigation, what they came up with was a plan that required obviously billions of dollars for new levees and new redirections of the Mississippi Delta. But they went to the industry and said, look, you guys know you're responsible for this. We have your admission. Can you kick in over years $18 billion? We, the state of Louisiana, we will come up with the rest. We just need you to give $18 billion for the damage you've caused. And they still said no. They forced this lawsuit upon themselves because they knew they could win it. But
yeah, they had a Nanette Brown in their pocket.
Exactly.
Well, okay, let me ask you something, Farron. Okay, this is an area where industry pumps more toxic chemicals, where the oil industry and the chemical industry, they pump more toxic chemicals, more carcinogens into the air and into the water than most any place in the world, by the way, including China. You could compare what goes on what they call Cancer Alley there in Louisiana with what goes on in China, and you can't tell the difference. What is it if you have federal judges that won't let this case go forward? What's the next move?
Well, obviously the case is going to be appealed, but then at that point it's going to depend on who's on the appellate court. And as we have discussed so many times, as we've written in the Trial Lawyer magazine, there aren't that many good courts left. Republicans have done a phenomenal job over the years of packing the courts, and especially now with the Citizens United, we have seen more money than ever in the 2012 midterm elections, or 2014, excuse me, flowing into judicial elections. Tens of millions of dollars, whereas in the past it would be a couple million. And so if there is a judge that has been elected, he has been elected or she has been elected with industry money. And if there's a judge moved
up the ranks. In other words,
right.
Before Nanette Brown gets appointed, she has to have industry behind her. And the reason she was unanimously approved in Congress, obviously, was because industry loved her.
Right. And industry owns Congress. So if they want somebody to be approved, they start making phone calls. And that is exactly what happened here with this story. The defense law firms started hiring lobbyists, and they started making these phone calls in order to get the case moved to Nanette Brown. So this, again, none of this was coincidence, and Nanette Brown was not a passive member of these law firms.
Yeah.
She was their environmental specialist sitting in courtrooms next to these people and defending their behavior.
So the net result of all this, Farron, is that more than 1,900 square miles of coastline in Louisiana has vanished over the last 80 years, and the industry is continuing to pollute what's left. And the industry admits that they're responsible for 40% of the wetlands loss. But basically, nothing, even with that admission of guilt, nothing's going to change because, again, money talks. And right now, with Citizens United, that money is completely out of control to where you can have the oil industry, the chemical industry, handpick the cherry-pick judge that they know is going to rule for them. And in the end, the people are the people who suffer. Farron, thanks. Good coverage on this. Let's talk more about it as it develops. I know there's more to it.
Absolutely.
So, Pap, like we said at the top of this program, lots of news this past week, and it is it's fascinating to me. There were two very big stories in, I guess, what we would call. In the news media, and I include Jon Stewart in that, and I'm not sure what that says about the media or what that says about Jon Stewart, probably a little bit of both. But the big story, of course, is that NBC has suspended its nightly news anchor, Brian Williams, for 6 months without pay. This is following the revelations of his fake claims as to being shot at by RPGs while in a helicopter.
Okay, now, Sam, just so people get this story a little bit clearer, this isn't where there was anything equivocal. It wasn't like, well, gee, maybe I misspoke. If you listen to what he had it down to details. The rocket crashed into the right side of the helicopter. The helicopter went into a spin. The smoke started all around me. I couldn't breathe. There's nothing equivocal about this. And the spooky thing is now you're seeing NBC doing what they're supposed to do, and that's to investigate other stories like that. Look, there's some type. This isn't just a minor issue. First of all, would we ever see Walter Cronkite with a story like this? Would we ever see Huntley Brinkley? Would we ever see Morrow? Of course not. This is a pathology that's a little scary here. This is very scary to me because this is the guy, talking to 15, 16 million people a night. About what's the news of the day. But this is a pathology. We're not just talking about, gee, I got it wrong. He made up the story. And now it's clear there are other stories he might have been involved with. This is serious stuff, man.
It is. I got to say, though, on some level, on one hand, we're talking about the pathology of one guy who is looking back on stories and exaggerating his role for whatever reason. Obviously, he wants it. It makes him feel good to think that he was in that situation. It shows sort of the mentality of what happens when you get embedded in those situations. You begin to identify with the soldiers that you're ostensibly covering.
Yeah, I mean, but Sam, I'd like to be the greatest saxophone player in the world, but I never played with Charlie Parker. I never, that's the equivalent of me saying, and in my mind, Pap, you're really great jazz saxophone. Oh yeah, well I played with Charlie Parker. That's how crazy this is.
But now the irony is, of course, you see NBC suspending this guy for 6 months, whereas I want to know about the journalist who was suspended for a day for lying or participating in the lies that got us into Iraq in the first
place.
Very
good point.
Very good point. I mean, on one level, this is about, this would be the functional equivalent in your story of you saying, not only did I play with Charlie Parker, but when I play the saxophone, I can actually cure polio. I mean, that is a lie that then begins to implicate other people.
Yeah,
and,
okay.
And so that's what yes. And look,
this guy delivered the nightly news, Sam.
Well, that's
this
the other
is a guy
thing.
who's understand. This is a guy with. You remember him with MSNBC? You remember with MSNBC when every night was, oh my God, I can't believe what Bill Clinton did. This is going to be terrible for my children. This is the image of the president. Don't you remember all this crazy talk? And all of a sudden, next thing he's anchoring the damn news. Well, he was like a right-wing hack. If you think back, he was MSNBC's right-wing hack. He was there during the time that they got rid of Phil Donahue and they had Mike Savage on the air, and they bring in these right-wing hacks. And this guy just migrates from there to doing the friggin' nightly news. This is a big story in the sense that how do news people, I understand producers working all around him. How do those producers that are supposed to be the people getting the news not know that the guy that's been on the nightly news for years has been made up this fantasy, pathological lie?
Yeah, I mean, but here's the other part about that that's sort of interesting is that, you said, would Walter Cronkite survive something like this? Of course not. He'd never get himself in that situation. But then when you think about it, I mean, look, right now, Pap, you could hold a gun to my head or you could give me a winning lottery ticket. And in neither one of those situations could I even tell you, who hosts the ABC nightly news or the CBS nightly news, nor would I be surprised if you told me they were canceled 15 years ago. I mean, that's the thing that's
a different generation, though. Okay, that's our generation. We get our news off the internet. Well, I don't watch nightly news, but there are a bunch of old people around that do watch nightly news. Not to say I'm not old already.
But I mean, but part of that is like, there is a posturing of like this guy, and I'm not saying that he shouldn't be suspended. He should be suspended at the very least. But there are more prominent
psychological
lies.
problems.
Yes, it's
Sam.
true.
He needs
but there are more
counseling.
prominent lies that this media propagates.
Oh, look, hey, how about the lies the lies that you're right. The Iraq was, all of them were telling lies. Every single damn one of them on the nightly news was telling a lie. They knew it was a lie. New York Times was telling a lie. But, okay, so we still can't ignore the fact that this guy's got some, this guy's got some
It just eats at me
squirrels.
that on some level, this is the way that NBC sort of justifies the other lies. That, this is the way that they basically say, this is how we earn our integrity. To focus only when it's a situation where this guy has a sort of almost like an individual pathology.
No. Anytime when he's caught, that's it. The lie is fine until they're caught, until somebody makes a big issue out of it. Otherwise, we're going to let the liars just continue doing what they do day to day. Now, it is a dysfunctional corporate media. This is no longer a corporate media that looks anything like Huntley and Brinkley or Walter Cronkite. My God, it is something that's barely recognizable as a news source anymore, Sam.
Well, what's ironic is that this happens the same week that Jon Stewart, and I don't have much to say about it other than it is ironic that it happens the same week where a guy who basically contends that he's hosted a comedy show for the past, 15 years or 14 years or whatever it's been, has been the most reliable source of news in our society, particularly to younger people. And so it's
Thank
just
you, Liz Winstead.
Right, indeed. I mean, it is Liz Winstead, our former co-worker at Air America, one of the founders of The Daily Show. It was pre-Jon Stewart, but she basically built the foundations of that program. But it is fascinating to see that both these things happen in the same week, and to compare and contrast what has become of what was the primary institution, for I guess keeping people aware and involved as citizens, and how that has shifted. I mean, it's just fascinating that Jon Stewart, a guy who ostensibly hosted a comedy show, who is arguably the most trusted name in news, and the guy who has anchored one of the most supposedly prestigious news positions, anchoring the NBC Nightly News, has taken a 6-month suspension in disgrace. And, and part of what irks me about that suspension is not so much the suspension itself, but the fact that, look, there are deeper fundamental problems with corporate media, network news, ranging from lies about Iraq itself, not just the individual experiences of their reporters, but the lies that got us into that war, and the failure of our network.
And they knowingly reported them knowing they were lies. That's what.
And knowingly reporting them, but did nothing to inform the citizenry in this country.
To sell ads.
Exactly, and we still see that dynamic. That dynamic has not changed. I mean, you had mentioned, we were talking about this at the break, about climate change.
Oh, yeah, good example. Really good example. Look at all these stories coming out in social media saying, where is corporate media on climate change? And you've got this huge number of media outlets that have made this catastrophic climate change story into almost this snooze and snore moment, Sam. And they're real clear why they're doing it. First of all, they know the American public. The American public now is officially reading and comprehending at a middle school level. And more importantly, that same middle school public, they rely on Fox News quality 10-second sound bites more than they do to take the time to do any analysis to understand a very complex message. Secondly, not enough Americans are even experiencing all of this yet. They're not living near a dust bowl like California. They're not in Texas where everything's dying because it doesn't have enough water, and they're not in Texas or California, so they don't see it firsthand, or they can't actually see ocean water creeping up to their front door. They don't have any sense that this is happening to me right now, so they don't pay attention to it. They see winter storms, they see chaos from winter storms, and they don't understand that they're already experiencing climate change, that's it. Because at the same time that they're seeing the worst storms in history, winter storms in history, they're listening to these Fox News idiots, these sophomoric commentaries about how snowstorms prove that there's no global warming. It's difficult to explain science in 10 seconds, but the corporate media doesn't have to do that. They can do what Ed Schultz does, for example, what he's doing with BP right now, where he spent an entire week talking a little bit about it every night so people can understand what's happening with the BP catastrophe. There's an overwhelming amount of corporate and billionaire money being pumped into think tanks, lobbying groups, AstroTurf groups, to convince us not to worry. And these idiots that run corporate media are saying, well, it's not a story because nobody's worried. Well, the ship is sinking, and they're telling us to ignore all the water on the deck.
And I'm not even convinced, frankly. Look, I mean, there is the hosts of these shows, the producers of these shows, for the most part, they know who's advertising on their networks. They know who's advertising in the pages of their online publications. And, it's not hard to tell, right? I mean, you simply got to watch one of these shows and you will see that these major carbon polluters are one of the biggest, this bread and butter stuff for these corporate media outlets. And so the idea that they're going to bite the hand that feeds them, But
here's the point. Sam, to me, look, maybe you can work through this idea. I can't. You got the guy, the MBA, that can't even write an entire paragraph without help, determining what the news is according to who advertises with the network. But you still have the breakouts. You still have out there, they're fewer and fewer, but you still have the Ed Schultz. Now, I'm just telling, this is a great example. I mean, not only because he's a friend, but because I watch what he does. TPP was a great example. Who the hell was talking about it? Ed Schultz, Tom Hartman. Right. Tom Hartman's another great example of this. There are the breakout folks that say, damn it, I got to tell the story. But I don't know whether it's the producer level. I mean, you do MSNBC show up. I do the same thing. And the producers there that we work with are very good producers. But what about these producers that
but the bottom line is, I really do believe that the corporate owners of these outlets, they're okay with a couple of isolated voices here or there talking about those things. And you're right. I mean, we got to give credit where credit is due. Nobody has talked about TPP the way that Ed has, and nobody's talked about
Tom
TPP,
has,
period.
Tom has.
And Tom has too.
Tom Hartman.
But I'm saying, Ed is in the belly of the beast, as it were, over there. And the fact is, like, these big corporate behemoths, for them, it's not even always necessarily about ratings. It's also about, hey, we've got a big merger coming up, maybe, and we want to make sure that we're not on the wrong side of things. And so there's a lot of convoluted agendas that are there, and it is, these outlets are just not doing a service. And so, just to swing it back full circle, they can suspend somebody for embellishing and maybe lying outright about their experience in Iraq. But never, I'm not downplaying it. I'm just saying, like, I'm just not willing to give them that much credit for having running such a type ship when it comes to integrity, because I think that's just a fig leaf at the end of the day. Yeah. But Pap, of course, another big story this week was that there was a man in North Carolina, Chapel Hill, who shot 3 Muslim college students, or I should say UNC students, and ostensibly, and I don't know if we ever know the basis of this. For a while, it was being floated that this guy did it over a parking space, but there's a lot of reason now to believe that that was just one part of this ongoing drama.
It wasn't a parking. The police writing this. Can you imagine, over a parking place? What kind of bonehead police officer said this is about a parking place? Really? Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I mean, we should keep in mind that we know that that area has been in the news because there was an attempt about a month ago or something where the chapel there wanted to do a once-a-week Muslim call to prayer, and that was quashed because of right-wing pushback in this country, religious fundamentalist pushback. This guy supposedly had posts on his Facebook where he was sort of a determined atheist of some sort. But we know the context of Islamophobia in this country. And, I mean, I want people just for a moment to imagine that you had a Muslim 45-year-old man who attacked 3 Christians.
Oh, my gosh.
And had posted on his Facebook, some type of anti-Christian screed. I mean, the entire media would have shut down.
Oh, we'd be at war with Iran by tomorrow.
Locked down.
So you've got... Exactly. You got Mike. You know the story that ties into this real Huckabee. Huckabee is out talking crazy Huckabee talk. Okay.
Of course he has to, because we should just tell people the president spoke at a national prayer breakfast last week, and because he basically recounted the history of religious violence, and it was a very unnotable, I thought, speech, but it had set the right wing off in a huge tizzy.
Yeah, and all of a sudden he's against the Jews in Israel, and Huckabee makes this equivalency. He says the threat of Islam versus the threat of climate change. An idiot says, oh, well, a beheading is much worse than a sunburn. Now, this is a guy running for president of the United States for his second time, and he still is a contender when you look at the polls.
Oh,
this
definitely.
is the guy that the American public, this guy's brilliant, man. And the Christian right love him because he's a preacher, even though he is a frigging fraud, has hustled money out of little old ladies for most of his religious career, $20 a shot, buy your way to heaven. But this is a guy that is the equivalent is, the threat of Islam versus climate change. And he says, well, a beheading is much worse than a sunburn. And back to your story on North Carolina, I just so happens my daughter goes to UNC Chapel Hill. It's a very diverse, very progressive campus. It's like an oasis in the middle of Stupidville, North Carolina. I mean, it's the only place that still survives there in Stupidville, North Carolina. And so for the police to say this was over a parking place is ridiculous. It's part of the Stupidville mantra. This was pure out racism, and the guy needs to be charged for racist crime here. He needs to be the rest of his life in prison, obviously, but it's just disgusting, man, because the Huckabee types are out there, and the Fox News types are out there, and the Glenn Beck types are out there, and Michelle Malkins and the Ann Coulters and the O'Reillys and all of the hate talkers are bringing people to this point in America.
Well, I'll tell you, it's fascinating to see what's going on in that respect, because there are Republican candidates who are trying to stake out sort of the most crazy territory, and so they each have to become more religiously fanatic and fundamentalist and hateful and crazy. So we have all these things that are sort of these disparate elements that are coming together in between, between the Islamophobia on one hand and what's happening with John Boehner inviting Bibi Netanyahu to speak in front of Congress, and neither Netanyahu's government nor Boehner informing the White House, and some pushback there to the point where you have Joe Scarborough on his program saying that Democrats don't understand the plight of Jews or something to that effect. I mean, honestly, it is the ridiculousness now that we're going to be subjected to over the coming months and really the next year or so. Yeah,
we got to fight through this for a year.
And look, I mean, and people will say this is ridiculous. Why are you talking about it? Because the people have to understand what we're dealing with here. And it is not just like guys like Huckabee will say this stuff and they're just saying it for the consumption of their electorate. It is, they will say this stuff for the consumption of their electorate, but they will deliver on this stuff, and they will never stop saying it, and they will never stop pursuing these type of policies.
Just chip away a little bit at a time, chip. And before you know it, you move into Crazyville to the point you don't even know that it's crazy anymore. That's what's happening to this country. We don't even know how crazy even sounds because we hear it every day, and it's become the norm. And so, but you're right, we're going to be hearing about this for a year. We're going to have to live through this for a year. We're going to have to agonize and plenty of material. It's plenty of great material. But you see the threat, Sam, the threat is it moves the ball a little further to the right to where the norm is not even recognizable anymore, to where we're moved into the midst of this insanity, this crazy talk, this Huckabee type of crazy talk that all of the Republican presidential candidates are going to be giving us, to where all of a sudden it just seems normal. Well, yeah, okay, I grew up with that. Yeah, it seems
I mean,
like
that's how you
normal
get,
talk.
Ben Carson is out there. He was just named to the Southern Poverty Law Center anti-gay extremist list. And you're right. These guys keep setting markers that push the conversation so far deep into Crazyville that, Jeb Bush hires a bigot to be his chief technology officer, and it's just like, man, what are you going to do?
Along with that, you got 3 of them running for president that may be in jail, for God's sakes, between Perry, Christie, and one of them, McDonnell, is already on his way to prison, I hope. But that's just the nature of where we are. That's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can keep up with us throughout the week online at ringofireradio.com or on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio and on Facebook. I'm Mike Papantonio. We'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire.